tides. Yep.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Freese. I'm the mayor of Tonganoxie. I'm calling to order this regular meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council for April 15th, 2024. Ms. Huntington, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Partridge?
Here.
Ms. McCutcheon?
Here.
Ms. Stevens is absent. Mr. Donnelly? Here. Mr. Dale?
Here.
Would you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the minutes. Anybody have any questions or concerns about the minutes? If not, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item 3 is the consent agenda where we review the bill payments for the previous period. Any conversation or questions about the bill payments? If not, I would accept a motion to approve.
Motion to approve is presented.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We have no old business to take care of. We have no speakers to speak of.
No signups, Mayor.
New business, we'll move on to item A, consider approval of funding distribution for the Tonganoxie Days 2024 event. Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Mayor. You'll see in the agenda packet an attachment tonight that's the letter from the Tonganoxie Business Association president, and it conveys a summary of the funding request for the 2024 Tonganoxie Days event, which is being organized by a committee largely comprised of leadership from the Tonganoxie Business Association. The request for this year is for the typical amount of $7,500, which is the amount that we budget in the city's general fund for support of this event. In addition to that budget, we also anticipate $2,500 each year for the mayor's tree lighting event held later in the year. The date of this year's event is outlined as September 21st, 2024, and the format and programming does have a similar track to what we've seen in prior years. The committee has started planning efforts, but all of those components are not finalized entirely at this point. They are also conjoining with the night before fireworks display organized through the Recreation Commission and their plans to utilize their property for that fireworks display. We do anticipate later in the year the City Council would hear a request for that fireworks display to be authorized in similar fashion to prior years. Staff don't have any concerns to express about this funding request, and upon approval, we would distribute those funds and continue to work with the group to get this special event on track for later this year.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions, council? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to approve.
I'll move that we authorize a funding distribution of $7,500 to the Tonganoxie Business Association to support the costs of Tonganoxie Days 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item B is Resolution 04-2401, approving and authorizing the First Amendment to Development Agreement with Hills Pet Nutrition. Mr. Brakovich?
Yep, thanks, Mayor. We have a very brief presentation tonight, but I hope it'll help kind of outline what the current situation is and what the proposed remedy is. And we've spent some time with Hills staff in reviewing it, and they're comfortable with the draft that's being presented tonight. So having said that, previous action on this item, you probably recall, those of you that were on the City Council at the time, back in June of 2021, we had advertised for a public hearing related to a tax abatement associated with the EDX, or Kansas Constitutional Exemption. It's similar to IRBs. It's just a process to get up to a 10-year tax abatement. And so we held that public hearing in conjunction with approving a development agreement for the Hills Pet Nutrition project. As you recall, there were some numbers in that development agreement that Hills has exceeded. I think it required a minimum investment of $250 million. They almost doubled that investment level. 80 jobs, we know they're well into over 100 jobs now. And even the average wage numbers, we know that their entry-level employees were at about $28 an hour. So the project's done well. It's built, completed, and operational, and have met those obligations. So one of the things in the tax abatement within the development agreement that we had spelled out was a 20 mil held harmless number for the school district. So in the state of Kansas, different tax incentives require a different level of held harmless. And for those that might be watching at home and not sure what that means, or even if some of us aren't sure, I'll try my best to explain it. So there's certain provisions of a total mill levy that's done by the school district in this case. And the held harmless provision means that the new value that's created by the project is not part of that exemption. So whatever the held harmless component is. So for EDX, the state law requires simply that the school district's capital outlay, the mill specifically dedicated towards that, is the part that has to be protected. What we did for Hills, though, is we suggested withholding a higher amount like you would in a TIF, which is that 20 mils. And so that was the agreement we advanced and everyone agreed to. What we found now as the project is coming out of the partial valuation while it was under construction and under full value, in conversations with the county clerk's office, they are unable to process the 20 mil held harmless. And I'll do my best to explain why. I think it's limitations in their software. And so they have to first protect that capital outlay because that's what's required by state law and EDX. And so in the case of, and we can probably go to the next slide, it'll maybe make more sense. So this is the current school district's levy rate. The total is on the far right at 59.857. Capital outlay is the one I've highlighted here, so it's 7.384. We think that the state has a cap on that of 8 mils total. So then the question becomes, well, how do we collect that additional 12.6 and some change? And so we asked Ms. Kerstelick, we've asked our bond counsel, Kevin Wimpy with Gilmore and Bell, hey, what's a creative way to get here? Again, the intent was originally to protect it for the school district. Is there still an avenue to do that? And it quickly became apparent that the only way to actually get this is to create a pilot or a payment in lieu of taxes that would represent this 12 mils. Well, in Kansas, state law dictates that a pilot payment is distributed just like a normal property tax payment. So we can't just create a pilot for one taxing entity. So in this case, what we're proposing is to create a pilot based off of this 12 mils, roughly, that's, we're just trying to round up to make it easy math here, that would go then to all of the other taxing entities. It would still protect, first and foremost, the 7.384 mils, so whatever value the county has on it, they'll capture that for the school district. And then what we're proposing in these next few slides to show is here's the pilot schedule starting in 2024. So in addition to that 7.3 and some change mils for the school district, this would be the pilot payment that Hills would pay in addition to that. The other part of held harmless is the state of Kansas has 1.5 mils. That's all factored into that held harmless. So that first payment of $150,000, that was derived by placing a value of $50 million on the Hills facility. So for full transparency, I believe the county has placed that on the tax rolls at $80 million, but I understand that that's under appeal. And it, at $80 million, it by 10, 20-fold represents the highest private, level capital investment in the county. And so what we picked was a number in between where we think the appeal is, and what we're suggesting is building off of a $50 million value. Year one pilot would be $150,000. We would apply an annual escalator of 5%, but these are fixed pilot payments. So they're not subject, like the typical process would be the county, if this project had an 80% tax abatement, the county assessor would go determine, here's the appraised value, you'd apply an 80% tax abatement. But the problem is, or one of the complications, not a problem, a complication is, in this instance, like if the facility wants to appeal their value, now you're kind of going back and forth and not really sure what that tax payment is going to look like until the appeal is finalized. They'll probably make a payment under protest, and then at some point, if the value gets lower, get some money back. So we think, A, that's really complicated. B, going into this fixed pilot for 10 years, every taxing entity knows this is what they're going to get. But again, the school district is still going to get that capital mill outlay capture outside of this. So if we want to look real quick at what that $150,000 would look like distributed, here's what it looks like to each taxing district. So the school district is still the largest taxing entity within the city of Tonganoxie tax district, and so they're still going to get $63,000. So whatever the value is on the tax rolls through the county, the first thing the school district is going to get is that 7.346 mils for capital outlay. In addition, in year one, they're going to get another $63,000 through this pilot payment. Leavenworth County is the second largest taxing entity for the city of Tonganoxie taxpayers. Let that sink in for a second. They're under this scenario, they get $37,500. The city, $36,000, and you can see the list go down. Library, Rec Commission, and the state. And so, again, that $150,000 would be paid by Hills. The county receives it, distributes it to all the taxing entities according to this. And then each year, that 5% escalator, as was shown on that previous slide, those pilot payments would be handled in the same way. The provisions within this First Amendment, again, protect those held harmless provisions that can't be impacted by this, and then account for the fixed pilot schedule that we're suggesting. Okay, I see a lot of heads nodding like, yep, followed you, that's clear as mud. I would be happy to answer any questions. I know I kind of rolled through that pretty quick. We can go back to the first few slides, since there's only a handful of slides, to see how this has progressed. But again, this is the way, and this was, I guess I should have stated earlier, this was really important to Hills. Once it became clear that the county was not collecting the 20 mills, that was not acceptable to Hills. And they worked side by side with us to come up with a way to make sure that whatever commitment they had made for that 20 mils of full value to come to the community in some shape or form was going to come to fulfillment. And this is the identified way of making that happen. Okay. Questions, comments?
Do we have to have all taxing entities approve that?
No. So this agreement,
This resolution will solve for all of the above.
correct. It's still under the original tax abatement we considered and approved, and still under the same BOTA order, Board of Tax Appeals order.
Is it possible to, outside of the school district, leave an entity out and redistribute?
No, the pilot has to go along the normal, like a normal property tax payment distribution. But I do think there is an avenue to talk to some of our partners about if there's undedicated portions of their mill and what they might want to do with those funds for projects in that area. I mean, I certainly don't speak for the city council, but I know that when I weekly watch the county commission meetings, I certainly hear a lot of armchair quarterbacking of this deal, a lot of negative comments about this project has never returned, there's no return on the investment. I mean, and let's be honest, for the record, I mean, we got $4.5 million from the county to go help develop that business park. Between Hills, DSM, and Unilock, there's over $500 million dollars of private capital investment made. There's hundreds of high-paying jobs created at that business park. And I think that's the impact that certainly the city of Tonganoxie was looking, a way to, expand the tax base, take the burden off residential rooftops, create commercial, get that kind of property tax generation going from things that are assessed at a 25% commercial rate and provide good paying jobs for our local economy. So I would hope that even outside of this windfall now of property tax revenues that might become available through a pilot, that our partners at the county realize what an incredible return there's been on that $4.5 million. But that's just a city manager's opinion.
Anyone else? Have our partners at the county signed off on this, like perhaps the county treasurer? Or does she
So
have-
they don't have any approval on this, but we did reach out to the county clerk and the county appraiser. And when we were talking about this as a concept to ensure that this was something they could accept, that they could accept a pilot payment in addition, and they indicated that they could. And that's why we continue to move forward and negotiate the pilot with the folks at Hills.
Okay.
And one other comment on this, again, and my apologies for including this late. I got added in the packet this morning. That's not typically our pattern. But the agreement itself is literally a 2-page document. And we are trying to meet a county-imposed deadline. They suggested if we were going to take any action like this, that we get something to them before May 1st. And so we were really in a scramble. And again, Hills did an expedited review of it and frankly offered no edits or comments back to what our attorneys had drafted. So we're good to go from a legal standpoint.
Does that rain?
I've heard it so long, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, sorry, George.
That's okay.
George, you might, for the next meeting or two, split down that next 10 years for tax, how it splits up by entity for totals.
Sure.
If you don't mind, it would be helpful.
I can definitely do that. One thing I'll offer here, the total of these pilot payments over the course of the 10 years is just shy of 1.9 million. Again, the school district is the largest impact, but I can tell you that during that same time frame, the county gets about $472,000. The city gets about $453,000. Now, again, because that gets distributed like a normal property tax payment, some of that money is already dedicated, has to go to certain things like debt and bond interest payments or whatever. It's the same issue for us. But like if we're looking at the city, Dan, our unencumbered funds would be like general fund and, yeah. So I think there's an opportunity to open some discussions regarding this newfound revenue.
Okay. Any other questions, folks? If not, I would seek a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 04-24-02 approval, 04-24-01, approving and authorizing the First Amendment to development agreement between City of Tonganoxie and Hills Pet Nutrition.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
Yes, second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item C, Resolution 04-2402, approval of the mill and overlay and curb replacement street maintenance contract. Staff, Porter, Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Mayor. We were excited to bring to you the list of bids received last week for the 2024 Street Maintenance Improvements Plan and Project RFP, which was issued about a month ago. We went through the scope of the RFP in more detail at that time, but I'll just quickly remind you that the majority of the work is for mill and overlay services. Some areas required milling and limited overlay, and some required overlay alone. Some additional curb replacement work, and then our 2024 maintenance plan still does include a little bit of city self-performed work completed by our Public Works Department, but not a tremendous amount compared to prior years. You'll see listed in the agenda statement for this item that the city did receive 7 bids. Staff reviewed each bid and determined that each were complete, and the base bid amounts you see listed in that reference table reflect accurate depictions of apples to apples comparison based on unit quantities and other details in each bid. Newland Paving Company Incorporated had the low bid in the amount of $508,920.50, and they were the low bid by a fairly significant margin, although the next 3 bidders were all more tightly listed in price compared to that low bid. We did check references for this company as they've not performed work for the city of Tonganoxie before. Mr. Heskett checked multiple references and reported back that they reported a good record of service and full recommendations that the city would be acting in its best interest to move forward to work with this company. One other thing that is promising about this company is their aggressive time frame. They've targeted potentially starting in May and trying to complete in June. The city's contract specifications did give up until October 1, which allows us to attract more bidders because it allows a wider schedule. But we have in the past experienced issues when school starts back up in August and street work is either just wrapping up or just getting started. And the rise in traffic in the community coincides with this level of interruption to the normal traffic flow in certain areas of the city. Based on this understanding in comparison to budget, which we were intentionally light on details at the last discussion, the street maintenance program and the special highway fund is budgeted at $500,000 in 2024. So you can see that this bid does exceed that by $8,920. One thing that we're able to do though in the special highway fund is to limit the amount of city self-performed work and thus the amount of expenses for that. And we do have a margin of an additional $25,000 in commodities costs that Kent and his crews are able to forego to allow us to accept this contract as is without any unit price reductions or any other adjustments. Staff do recommend moving forward with the full approval of the project and be happy to take your questions if you have any.
Any questions, council? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to approve.
I'll move that we approve the quote for the 2024 Tonganoxie Mill and Overlay and Curb Replacement Street Maintenance Project from Newland Paving Co., Inc. for a cost not to exceed $508,920.50.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly and Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item D is the consider approval of painting the police department facility. Mr. Brakovich?
Thanks, Mayor. Similar to the previous item, this is something that we had anticipated in the budget as we developed the budget for 2024. To put it as briefly as possible, I guess the budget authority we had for this was $10,000. Chief Lawson is here tonight. He did go secure 3 bids. The low bid on that was $8,950 from Andy's, I believe. And so we are recommending to move forward, and that item is coming in under budget authority. So be happy to answer any questions. Chief's actually looking for a lot of input on what color to paint the building, and is probably going to do a survey monkey to get as much input as possible. Nothing brings a community together like picking a color for something, so.
Absolutely.
You're out of your mind.
And you could make that color conditional upon your approval.
I'd make a motion to make it fire engine red.
That sounds beautiful.
Died for lack of second. All right. Any other questions? If not, I would accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize staff to hire Andy's Roofing to paint the police department located at 128 East 6th Street and conduct necessary repairs to siding with costs of all associated services not to exceed the budget allocation of $10,000.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item E tonight is the 2023-24 compensation study presentation. Mr. Brockovich.
Sure. I think this might be a joint effort between Mr. Porter and I. And actually, items E and F are related. Item F would be the actual action item we're asking you to consider tonight, which would be approving a new set of pay ranges. So to kind of remind everyone, back in 2020 and 2021, we had issued an RFP to go out and do a formal compensation study. It's something that the city, at least by the records we reviewed, we weren't able to find that a study had been done in about 10 years. And we knew what the competition was coming out of COVID for talented people, and we wanted to both retain our quality employees as well as attract new quality employees. So we hired Logic Compensation Group at that time, and they did a really broad compensation study. They even looked a little bit of classification. At that time, we also asked them to do a look at benefits in terms of employee health insurance coverage, employee plus spouse, employee family, and just get a good sense of where we were, both from a compensation standpoint as well as from a benefit standpoint. And so here we are 3 years later. It was time to go back and see if there had been any market adjustments made. A couple of structural components, though, that we did back in 21 was all of our pay ranges are geared to be some percentage of market, right? And for us, the market, even though we have a very set list of cities we go out and specifically ask for data because they're most similar to us, but really the pool of people we're competing for is the Kansas City regional area. And so it's important for us to understand where we slot in for that. And so we've had a certain market target for the majority of the organization. But one thing we did in 21 was we peeled out our public safety components and went to even more aggressive market rate or market shares in those areas because of the competition we were seeing for those qualified individuals. And so we're recommending that, and the police department was the most aggressive compensation structure, and we're recommending to maintain that same market share in what we're presenting this evening. As a whole, the organization structure over the course of the last 3 years has shifted just under 10%, so about roughly 3% a year, which is, I don't think, unexpected. By the same, during that same term, the public safety component shifted by about 19.5%, or just shy of 20%. So considerable more movement. And we all see the national narrative and how difficult it is to recruit and maintain qualified, certified law enforcement officers. And so we're recommending that we keep placing that priority, that's an important component for us in our community. And you'll see that the PD's pay ranges are reflected differently, as are the fire departments. The fire department isn't quite as aggressive of a schedule as the police department, but both of those public safety components are addressed outside of the pay range structure for the rest of the organization. So police starts with the P moniker, and fire department conversely with the F. Again, we've made some adjustments. Our lower end ranges were just not very competitive to attract even entry level folks. So one of the adjustments we made, and Mr. Porter might be able to give you some more details on that, was we kept those low ranges but have incorporated seasonal or part-time help into those ranges so that they still make sense in our overall structure, but they're not dedicated to necessarily full-time staff that we have, and where we need to be with that full-time staff pay. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions about history and kind of the setup, and if not, I'll ask Dan to maybe give you a little more details on the outcomes of this study in particular. Dan?
I plan to discuss the budget impact discussion in the agenda statement particularly. Looking at these adjustments, the estimated total impact in fiscal year 2024 of moving forward with bring to minimum adjustments, in which employees who currently earn at a rate lower than the new range minimum for their position would be $61,877 prorated as to the remaining part of this fiscal year. On an annual 12-month basis, that would be just under $95,000. The changes are anticipated to impact 14 full-time city employees, 10 of which work currently in the city's police department, and 13 part-time fire department employees who serve as part-time paid firefighters in our blended department format. This representation of bring to minimum is just over 1/3 of city employees, 38%. But it is, again, the majority of the employees in the city's police department that would be seeing the adjustment to bring to minimum. When we reviewed the bring to minimum versus other alternative options for compensation adjustments, there could be other options that the city could pursue, such as range penetration. That was something that was done back in 2021, again, largely due to the fact that the city had not completed a rate survey, pay rate survey and compensation analysis in several years. So the most tenured employees back at that time were given a quartile percentage adjustment into the new ranges. At this point, based on the review of current compensation and our positioning to the market, the bring to minimum does seemingly accomplish the goals of making our compensation levels competitive, avoiding range compression, pay compression between different employees with different levels of tenure or positions within a department structure. And it also does make us more competitive in the entry-level pay for our new hires who wouldn't be coming in at a rate at or higher than people with tenure in our own departments in the city. When we look at the percent of budget, that $91,638 would be about 2.5% budget annually. When we review vacancy savings as well as other conservative payroll estimates, we feel that this level of adjustment being authorized would not create a negative year-end budget outcome. It's something we'll continue to monitor closely, and in particular more closely than we do in a normal year with making a mid-year adjustment like this, but the impact wouldn't be felt until May, so it would only reflect a little more than half the year in adjustments from what we initially estimated last summer for payroll. Happy to take any other questions you might have, though, about budget impact.
Council?
Sounds like any changes, when would they go into effect? Pretty much immediately, or the next month, or next pay period, or?
The earliest pay date that these changes could take effect would be the May 10th pay date for the city's payroll structure.
But they won't be retroactive or anything like that? Okay.
Is there a reason that we don't just go ahead and do the analysis, pay analysis every year instead of waiting 2 or 3 years to have a gap and a jump of 10, 9, 8, 10, 6%, whatever? I know there's a cost and a time factor, not just a cost, but to stay relatively competitive. I mean, historically, in my history, I did it every year, so you're not behind, but you could be if you wait 2 or 3 years, you might be out of whack. And you may have technological changes that make some jobs obsolete or less valuable and some jobs more valuable. So is there a reason we don't do it every year?
Yeah, Dan, I'll take a stab at it, and then you can add a few things, because Dan does a lot more of the frontline stuff. But 2 things. One is, if you look at the range width that's established for each of these, again, our goal is to be aggressive at that entry-level point to capture, but we also want to be able to retain and grow folks. So each range has roughly a 45 to 50% spread. And so when we couple that with our typical budgeting process, where we allow for a pool of up to 5% increases, when you look at those, a lot of the more traditional systems will have a pay classification, a grade, and then that grade will have steps like step 1 through 20. Ours doesn't. Ours has a minimum, midpoint, and maximum, and so it gives us the greatest amount of flexibility, gives our department heads the greatest amount of flexibility to make those movements. And so, again, even if someone got outstanding performance reviews, that 15% adjustment over, assuming they earn 5% increases each year for the 3 years, it's easily absorbed within that broad width of the pay range itself. The other component of this is these things are cyclical, and so as soon as we do this, in fact, we're making this presentation tonight, we've already received 2 cities that participated in ours. So Baser's doing a comp study, and I believe Eudora's doing one, but just for PD. And so we participate in those, and then we conversely get their results, just like the cities that participated in our survey get the results. And so typically over the course of a year, Dan, what would you say? How many times do we get asked to participate?
Probably 7 to 10 per year.
And so, you know, we do monitor those, Mr. Donnelly, just in case we see some massive adjustment. You know, one area, I focused a little bit on public safety, but another area we saw a big shift is kind of in your certified public works areas, water certified folks, wastewater certified folks. Those are high demand jobs that people just were having a hard time. Well, we're not having a hard time. We have a great group, and I hope they don't go anywhere until they retire. But those are jobs that other cities are paying premiums for as well. And so we noticed that there was an adjustment there that we'll make sure our structure incorporates. Dan, I don't know if you had additional thoughts on Mr. Donnelly's question.
The only thing I'd add is we do have an option every 2 to 3 years to sort of take a larger look and a more in-depth look at more positions and spend additional funds, you know, on the study and make it the broadest, deepest study we could do. Or we can also, at the recommendation of the consultants in this area, build in automatic increases like 1% or 1.5%, or tie it to a certain labor market standard. And thus, your ranges should progressively shift up slight amounts every year, making the jump sort of less painful or less severe. Now, the difficulty with that is if you do that and the market lags or reverses trend or stabilizes for a long time, you might be out ahead of your skis then. And so that is a philosophical thing, though, that we could consider doing is more incremental, shorter looks and smaller looks, or every 2 to 3 to 4 years, a deeper dive. And that's just been our practice since doing the first formal rate and compensation rate study in 2021, was to come back at least this soon so we weren't lagging even further behind.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I would accept a motion.
I make a motion, we approve resolution 04-2403, adopting amended 2024 pay range for employees of the city's Tonganoxie campus.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
May I ask a question real quick?
Did I
There's a blank in that resolution for when it is to take effect. Do we want to specify a date for that? Would it be for the May 10th?
A good date for us would actually be April 21st
Okay.
to start a pay period. So that would be a good add if possible.
I would amend that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
I will amend my second.
All right. Do we need to vote again?
No.
All right.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. That takes care of item F also, correct? And brings us to the city manager agenda, March 2024 financial report and quarterly treasurer's report. Mr. Porter?
Thank you, Mayor. In recognition of tax deadline day and Mr. Partridge's request, I'll try to be as brief as possible, but still give you the highlights of this financial report. We're a quarter of the way through the fiscal year, and you can see included at the very end of the financial report, the quarterly treasurer's report, which is required by state law to be published in the newspaper and considered by the city council in a timely fashion each year. 4 different times during the year. And so you can see that reflected in that highest level summary view. I do want to point out a couple things from the executive summary. We have still only received 5 reimbursements from the EDA grant, but we have filed and expect to shortly receive a 6th reimbursement. This will be our second to last reimbursement, as we're still finalizing the final pay app and thus the final grant remittance from the EDA for that project. But we are getting very close to completion of that grant administration process. We also still maintain a little over $611,000 in funding from ARPA federal funds. We'll complete in just the next week or so our second annual report for those funds as a non-entitlement unit of local government. And on our next monthly financial report, we'll attach a copy of that just for your reference. It's a fairly simple report, and it is due in the month of April. Looking at budget amendments, we had completed one in January of this year, but we're not going to contemplate any at this time and don't anticipate the need to focus on those, at least for a couple months. The next 2 pages of the reports highlight revenues and expenses for our major funds, our utility funds, and our non-utility capital funds. I'm going to skip to the revenue detail view on page 4 of 15 of the report. We've talked about that our second monthly financial remittance from the state of sales and use tax was delayed until March. The March report did make it by the end of the month, so the March remittance. So we do have now 3 months of the year to look at relative to last year's progress and relative to a 12-month look back and other ways we can look at it. So through 3 months of the year, we are about 2% less than budget in the sales and use tax for the general fund, but we are still up a little over 7% on a rolling 12-month look back period. So while these 2 to 3 months do show a slight dip from budget, they are slightly less in receipts than the first 3 months of last year. We still are ahead of pace if we look at it on an annualized basis and not a 3-month basis alone. On sales and use tax, in the infrastructure sales tax, the capital projects fund for our share of the county sales tax, we're a little less than 3% less than budget and a little less than receipts last year, but we're still 3.4% on a rolling 12-month basis, looking at that revenue source. So while these 3 months have been just a tick below where we projected and where we were last year, I don't think yet we have any cause for concern at this point. We'll continue to monitor this closely, though, and do a deeper dive into those state reports we can receive. One thing I did want to point out is in the city sales and use tax breakout, city sales taxes are actually up in the 3-month period, and use taxes are down by just slightly more relative to the last year. On the county side, county sales taxes are down, and county compensating use taxes are up. So sort of interesting to see that differential in activity level comparing the city to the county. I have talked with our colleagues in other communities in Leavenworth County, in cities in particular, and they express similar results of their sales tax levels and performances. So it was interesting to see the differential in the cities and the counties as a whole relative to where we were in prior years and in that regard. I probably won't highlight anything else on the report except to point out that on the fund balance levels shown in the quarterly treasurer's report on page 15, our opioid addiction fund, we did receive another remittance of that just this week. So we are approaching $20,000 in that fund. As a reminder, that's funds and settlements awarded to communities across the state, negotiated by the Attorney General's office. Those are funds we can only use for very specialized and outlined reasons, and so we'll prepare some proposals for you to consider at the advice of our public safety departments, who have some of the highest levels of interaction with the effects of the opioids crisis in our community. And then also I just wanted to point out that our outstanding debt levels in the quarterly financial report at the bottom of the page do reflect that we're just over $7.5 million in outstanding principal on all GO bond debt, and of course, our 2.38 million, which we anticipate to be a lower final debt obligation in temp notes, which we have right now. So for our water tower project, which again is not yet completed, and we have permanent financing or cash repayment obligations due about this time next year. So just wanted to highlight where we stood at this point, and if you have any questions, be happy to take those.
Any questions, council?
Yeah, if you know off the top of your head, what did December and November look like on the sales tax? Has this been going on for longer than 3 months, or do we know?
Let me pull that up. So the spread going back 3 more additional months for the city was 10% low, 1% low, and 41% high.
Okay.
And then, so those all aggregate to a smoother number, basically, not as low or as high. And on the county side, 2% low, right at the same level, and 30% high. So we can have these spikes. A lot of it is when companies choose to make remittances and when those get recorded at the state. They do it on an annual, semi-annual, quarterly, or monthly basis at their discretion. So we see that there are some volatility that isn't really linear or projected, based largely upon that.
Okay.
Those temp notes come due in March, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our budget preparation is really gonna need to focus on that long-term decision and cash balances and financing options.
All right, thank you, Mr. Porter. City Board and Commission's positions update.
I can give a quick overview on this item as well, Mayor, and thank you, Lindsay, for pulling that up. We did receive a request. There has been a position since, I believe, February on the library board, formerly occupied by a city resident, Brittany McWilliams, who chose not to seek reappointment. The library board struggled to find an applicant who was a city resident. They had one person in particular they would have loved to have recommended, but she lived in the county. Instead, they have finally secured a city resident, Ron Nichols, and his application is attached for reference in the packet. That appointment could be made at any time since that position is currently vacant as it was expired a couple months ago. And just as a quick reminder, the authority for that appointment is the mayor's appointment with the consent of the city council. We also wanted to highlight, while we're talking about this though, a couple other upcoming appointments. The Tonganoxie Recreation Commission has 2 positions with city appointments, one of which will become vacant in the end of June 2024. Ryan Bruni currently serves in that role. He's transitioned to become a member of the school board. So with that, they are interviewing 4 applicants later this week on Wednesday night, and we'll give a recommendation to the mayor and the city council of who that board would like to see fill that spot on the Recreation Commission. In addition to that, at the end of May, we have 2 planning commissioner spots up for either reappointment or reconsideration. Monica Gee currently serves as the chair and has a long history of service to the board. She's a county resident position on the planning commission, and the other position was the most recently appointed member, Brianna Irvin, who filled a very small balance of an unexpired term and is now up for reappointment. Both of those people have requested that the mayor and the city council consider reappointing them. So we have either this meeting or the 2 meetings in May to make a decision about whether to make those reappointments or to open it up for interest or take any other action that the mayor and council would like to see. So that's kind of where we stand, and we'd be happy to take your questions or your discussion on this.
Anybody have any questions?
On Ryan's position, he's city, he lives right outside of town, so.
Yeah,
That is not ringing a bell with me. Ryan's a good guy, I hate losing him on the rec commission.
we've had that topic come up in previous appointments, and he made it through somehow, I think.
No, he's a good guy, so.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and appoint Ron Nichols to the library board and reappoint Monica Gee and Brianna, what was the last name, Urban?
Irvin.
To the planning commission. If that's all right with council. If you approve, say aye.
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 If you oppose, say nay. Okay. Yeah, right.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right, city attorney agenda, Ms. Kerstelich.
No items, Mayor?
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem agenda, Ms. Stevens isn't here. City council agenda. You guys been up to anything cool?
I just want to make a note, and I talked with George about it. One of our property owners, I met with him, he had concerns, Mr. Clark.
Mr. Baker.
I meant Baker.
Yep.
Call him Clark. Mr. Baker, about some property that's adjacent to the project out in Stone Creek, and I know George has already addressed it with him, our city engineers addressed it with him, and I could not help him because I'm not an engineer, first of all, and he was asking engineer stuff, and having developed a lot of land, I understood what his concerns were, but I think we've addressed them appropriately, and I did invite him to come to the full council if he had concerns, but I just wanted to make sure I spent a couple hours with him, and he seems like a nice guy and has concerns, and, but I think our engineers have done everything they think is right and trying to get it done right. So anyways, I told him I would bring that up and invite him to come if he wants to.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Anyone else? I have nothing other than a couple of executive sessions. Mr. Partridge, do you have those?
Yeah. Anna, can we combine these two into one or no?
No, they are separate topics.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. I move that the city council recess into executive session to obtain legal advice pursuant to the attorney-client consultation exception in KSA 75-4319B2. The executive session will include the city attorney, city manager, and assistant city manager. The open meeting will resume in the city council chamber at 8:12 p.m.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We're now in executive session. Okay, we're out of executive session and back in open session. Let the record show that no binding action was taken during executive session. Mr. Partridge?
I move that city council recess into executive session to obtain legal advice pursuant to attorney-client consultation exception, KSA 75-4319B2. The executive session will include the city attorney, city manager, and assistant city manager. The open meeting will resume in the city council chamber at 8:24 PM. Excuse me, 8:19 PM.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're now in executive session. Okay, we're back in open session. Let the record show that no binding action occurred during the executive session. I have nothing more on the mayor's agenda. Jake, why don't you take us out of here?
I make a motion that we adjourn from this meeting now.
A second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, see you in a couple weeks.